Have you ever felt your mind spinning the moment you open your eyes in the morning? Unfiltered thoughts rush in. Worries about work, lingering echoes of yesterday's conversation, and fear of things yet to happen. In a chaotic world where everyone races to speak, to perform, to argue, and to react, we've come to believe that thinking more, talking more, and doing more are signs of strength. But that isn't true. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The kind of strength he spoke of is not loud. It doesn't come from winning every argument or reacting faster than others. It comes from restraint, from the ability to think less, speak less, and focus more. In this video, we will explore why silence, mindfulness, and selective attention are the foundation for building a resilient mind and a life guided by intention. 1. Observe your thoughts. Don't be carried away. There is a simple but often forgotten truth. Not every thought that appears in your mind is true, and not every thought deserves your belief or reaction. The human mind, as Epictetus once said, is not a perfectly accurate instrument, but a constant stream of impressions, memories, judgments, and responses. The problem is, most of us were never taught to look at the mind from the outside. We don't observe thoughts. We become them. And that is the source of much of our inner suffering. Imagine you are standing at a train station. Each thought is like a train passing by. Some carry anxiety, others regret, anger, or the longing to be seen. But you're not required to board any of them. You can choose to stand still. You can simply watch them pass. Most people don't realize this. A thought arrives and they immediately jump on board, assuming the thought is true, that it's them, that it must be resolved or acted upon, and so they get swept away from thought to feeling, then to action. But the Stoic learns to stay on the platform. They observe rather than react. When a thought arises, like "I'm failing" or "people don't respect me," they don't immediately believe it. They pause, breathe, and ask, "Is this thought true? Is it useful? What evidence supports it? And more importantly, if I believe it, will I become stronger or weaker?" This small interruption between having a thought and acting on it is where strength begins. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." That line is not just philosophy, it's practical instruction, because a thought is merely a whisper in your mind. It's not the truth, and it's not a command. It only gains weight when you accept it without testing or questioning it. A leader I once knew shared that he often woke up with a heavy feeling in his chest, hearing a voice in his mind saying, "You're not good enough, you haven't done enough, you're falling behind." For years, he believed that voice was him, that it spoke a truth that needed fixing, until he read Marcus Aurelius and for the first time learned to create distance between himself and his thoughts. He started saying, "I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough," instead of "I'm not good enough." That small shift in language opened a much larger door, because when you place the thought in front of you, you begin to see that you are not it. We don't need to meditate 10 hours a day or retreat to a mountain to practice this. Just a few moments each day, when a thought arises and you don't chase it. You see it like a cloud drifting by. You don't try to force it away or hold on to it. You simply observe. And gradually, like training a muscle, you develop the strength of inner observation. This doesn't make you numb. It makes you intentional. You're no longer a victim of your mind. You become its master. This is especially crucial in today's world, where your attention is the most hunted resource. Your mind is already overwhelmed with news, notifications, social expectations, success pressure, and constant comparison. If you don't know how to observe your thoughts, you'll be dragged everywhere. Hope to fear, excitement to disappointment, motivation to self-doubt. It's a loop without exit, unless you pause and begin to look within with clarity. 2. Speak less, and your words gain weight. In a world where everyone rushes to speak, the one who knows when to be silent stands out in an unusual way. We're living in an age where speed is valued more than depth, where everyone scrambles to speak, to debate, to prove something, to others, to the world, and sometimes to soothe themselves. But the more we speak, the thinner the truth becomes, and the more we force our words, the more we lose our inner steadiness. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes stronger when it remains calm amid the noise of the world." The Stoics understood this well. They didn't see silence as a lack, but as a sign of inner power. Speaking less doesn't mean you know nothing, nor does it mean you're avoiding anything. It means you've become selective about what is worth saying. And when you only speak what matters, each word carries real weight. There was a colleague I once worked with. He wasn't the loudest in meetings. In fact, some thought he was passive, even dull. But here's the interesting part. When he began to speak, the room went silent. No one interrupted. No one dismissed him. Because everyone knew, if he spoke, it was important. He didn't argue, didn't object for the sake of pride, didn't speak to show off. He only spoke when it was necessary. And that gave him a quiet power those who talk too much never have, the kind of respect that doesn't need to be demanded aloud. The Stoics believed that speech is a form of action, and all action must be intentional. They didn't speak to fill the silence, to please others, or to flaunt intelligence. Epictetus taught, be mostly silent, or speak only what is essential, and in few words. This is not just a way of life. It is a form of self-discipline, so that you remain in command of your words rather than being ruled by them. Many arguments in life begin with unnecessary words. A joke at the wrong time, a comeback driven by ego, a justification made out of fear of being misunderstood. But what we often forget is, you are not obligated to explain everything. Not everyone needs to understand you, and you are not required to respond to every provocation. Every time you speak just to defend your ego, you lose a piece of energy. And if that happens often enough, you'll find yourself exhausted by conversations that lead nowhere. On the other hand, when you speak less, you stay in control. You have time to observe others. You listen, understand motives, and realize many people are just projecting their inner insecurities outward. And when you don't enter that reaction loop, you not only preserve your own peace, you become someone who gives space for others to calm down too. There is a very special kind of strength in purposeful silence. When someone expects your reaction and you choose silence, they are forced to face themselves. When you don't return an insult, you're not weaker. You're refusing to hand over control of your emotions. When you stop trying to justify or win, you affirm that your worth doesn't come from external approval, but from inner stability. And most importantly, When you speak less, you begin to listen more. Not just to others, but to yourself. You gain a chance to ask whether what you're about to say is truly necessary, whether it adds value or is just a reflex. From that space, your words become intentional actions, and that's what makes you trustworthy in the eyes of others. Not because you speak often, but because you speak at the right moment. Speaking less is not retreat, it's a decision. And like all wise decisions, it demands courage, discipline, and inner freedom. In an age where everyone rushes to speak, timely silence is how you set yourself apart. Not by volume, but by depth. 3. Focus on what we can control. Life doesn't move according to our wishes. No matter how carefully you plan, there will always be things that happen beyond your expectations. People change. Opportunities come and go. Promises are broken. The world keeps moving, and most of it lies beyond your control. That is a cold truth, but also the very point where Stoic philosophy begins to shine. Because the Stoic does not seek certainty in the external world. They build stability from within by focusing entirely on what they can control: their thoughts, reactions, attitudes, and actions. Epictetus called this the essential distinction between what is within our grasp and what is beyond our reach. What you do, what you think, what you choose, these belong to you. But what others think of you, how the market behaves, who loves or leaves you, those are not in your hands. When you confuse the two, you live in a constant state of anxiety, disappointment, and frustration. But when you understand that boundary, you begin to free your energy from the useless and redirect it toward meaningful actions. I once met a man who lost his entire career after 20 years of building it. He shared that the most painful part wasn't the money he lost, but the sense of helplessness, watching everything he created collapse while being unable to stop it. For months, he lived in bitterness, blame, and guilt. But one day, he sat down and divided a sheet of paper into 2 columns. On one side, what he couldn't change. On the other, what he still could control. And from there, everything started to shift. He chose to focus on his habits, mindset, responses, and personal discipline. Results didn't come right away, but peace did. And from that peace, his energy returned. He didn't just rebuild his work, he rebuilt himself on a stronger foundation than before. The Stoics sees themselves as a captain at sea. You can't control the wind, nor can you stop the waves, but you can manage your sails, your rudder, and your direction. And here's the truth. Most ships don't sink because of the water outside, but because of what gets inside. Likewise, we are not drowned by what happens, but by how we allow it to affect our inner world. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who governed a vast empire, facing wars, betrayal, and illness, still wrote in his journal, "Happiness depends on the quality of your thoughts, not external circumstances." If a man like him, bearing the weight of the world, could focus on his inner state, then you and I, ordinary people, can do the same. Every day, we get to choose where to place our attention, on what we cannot change, or on the actions still within our power. This doesn't mean indifference to the world, nor does it mean surrendering to fate. On the contrary, it demands great courage, because blaming is easy, acceptance is hard, making excuses is easy. Looking within and asking, what can I do, even one small thing, to improve this situation? That's the harder path. And from that question, you begin to reclaim ownership of your life. Focusing on what you can control is also a way to protect your energy. Every time you obsess over what lies beyond your influence, gossip, others' approval, or the worst-case scenarios of tomorrow, you drain your energy on things you cannot change. But when you direct your focus to action, to the present, to each small decision, you build strength in the most sustainable way. And most importantly, focusing on what you can control is not a fix-all that makes life perfect. It doesn't guarantee success, prevent failure, or shield you from loss. But it is the only way to live without panic, without dependency, without breaking down at every twist in life's current. Because in every situation, no matter how difficult, you always retain control over one thing: how you choose to respond. And that, more than outcomes, more than ease, is the beginning of freedom, of dignity, and of a life lived with intention. 4. The mind is like soil. What you plant grows. Imagine your mind as a fertile field. It doesn't distinguish between good seeds and bad. It simply receives and nurtures whatever you plant. If you plant anxiety, anger, blame, and regret, you will harvest insecurity, pain, and exhaustion. On the other hand, if you sow mindfulness, discipline, gratitude, and clarity, you will reap peace, resilience, and an inner core that cannot be shaken. The problem is, most people plant seeds without realizing they're doing it. Many don't understand why they constantly feel heavy, tired, and unmotivated, even when nothing outside seems that bad. They assume the cause lies in their circumstances, in other people, or in bad luck. But they fail to see that every day they are sowing thousands of negative thoughts in their own minds. Self-criticism, complaints, replays of past mistakes, or imagined worst-case scenarios. And the mind, highly sensitive by nature, absorbs it all without a filter. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The life of a man is what his thoughts make it." That sounds simple, but it is a profound wake-up call. Because you cannot live a peaceful life if your mind is filled with anxious thoughts. You cannot be calm if you spend your days doubting yourself, judging others, or fearing things that haven't happened. What you nurture in your mind daily, though invisible, is shaping how you feel about yourself, how you see the world, and how you act. This isn't advice to just think positive. The Stoics never taught us to paint over reality or ignore emotion. They taught us to face reality as it is, but without being enslaved by negative emotions born from unexamined thinking. A negative thought may arise. That's natural. But you don't have to feed it. You can let it pass, and instead choose to plant intentional seeds in your mind. Gratitude for what remains, responsibility for what you're doing, and humility for what you've yet to learn. Notice this. The more you think about something, the more it grows. Obsess over old mistakes and you trap yourself in guilt. Revisit past wounds each night and you keep them fresh. Imagine bleak futures and you fear the very things you invented. The mind doesn't distinguish real from imagined. It only knows what occupies it, and that directly shapes your emotions, behavior, and quality of life. One of the most important Stoic practices is daily reflection, taking a few minutes to observe what you've been thinking about, how you've reacted, and whether those thoughts are helping your growth. In doing so, they clear the weeds from their mental soil and identify which seeds are worth planting tomorrow. You can apply this every day in the simplest way. Whenever a thought arises, pause and ask, "Does this thought make me stronger?" Does it help me act better? Does it reflect truth, or is it just an emotional reflex? If the answer is no, let it go. No judgment, no resistance, just don't water it. And instead, plant another thought, something you know is healthy, grounded, and worthwhile. When you practice this consistently, your mind will begin to change. Like a well-tended garden, it will bloom with clarity, calm, and inner strength. You will no longer be swept away by every passing emotion, because you've learned to choose what's worthy of staying inside you. And from that, every action you take, every word you speak, every decision you make, will come from a place of stability, wisdom, and purpose. The mind is the beginning of everything, and you are the only one responsible for that soil. So, observe each thought as a seed, because what you plant today, though unseen, becomes the life you harvest tomorrow. 5. Acceptance is freedom. Deep down, people rarely break because of pain itself, but because of their futile resistance to that pain. When life doesn't go our way, our first reaction is often denial, then blame, and then the attempt to change what cannot be changed. We want the past to be different, want others to behave better, want things to be right in the way we imagined. And it is in that struggle, not with the world, but with reality itself, that we become exhausted. Yet the Stoics offer another path. Not to fight what lies beyond control, but to accept it as it is. Acceptance is not surrender. It does not mean giving up action, giving up effort, or living in resignation. On the contrary, acceptance is the foundation from which intentional action begins. When you stop wasting energy trying to change the unchangeable, you can focus it entirely on what is possible. When you stop wrestling with the question, "Why did this happen to me?" you begin to ask a more practical one. What can I do now with what I have? And that is the first step toward freedom. I once received an email from a man who had spent his youth trying to please his father, a strict, distant man of few words. He pursued the career his father wanted, forced himself to appear strong, and waited decades for a word of approval. But on the day his father died, that word had never come. What remained wasn't just grief. It was an emptiness that had never been filled. Until he read these words from Epictetus. Freedom begins when you stop begging for permission to be yourself. That line woke him up. He realized he didn't need the approval of the dead. He needed acceptance from himself. And from that moment, he began to live like a free man. No longer trying to prove, no longer resentful, simply focused on becoming a better version of himself each day. We all have unresolved matters, a relationship left incomplete, a mistake that can't be fixed, a dream that has slipped away. But we don't have to let them bind us forever. Because once you accept that the past cannot be changed, it no longer controls you. You begin to see it as part of you, but not all of you. And only then can you begin a new chapter, not from zero, but from experience, from growth paid for in tears, in scars, and in the courage to face the truth. The Stoics understood that all emotions stem from perception. If you feel insulted, it's because you believe those words carry weight. If you feel broken, it's because you believe failure defines you. But none of that is necessarily true. The world can only wound you if you let it take hold in your mind. And the only way to regain sovereignty over your emotions is to accept reality, not sugar-coated, not denied, but simply as, this is happening, and I still have a choice. Acceptance is also a refusal to be manipulated by expectations. Expectations that others will understand us, that someone won't hurt us, that things should unfold in a reasonable way. When reality doesn't match the script we've written in our heads, we call it disappointment. But in truth, the disappointment doesn't come from the event. It comes from our refusal to accept the gap between imagination and reality. And only when you release the expectation can you see the truth. And from that truth, build your life on solid ground. Acceptance is not passivity. It is a deliberate act, a powerful choice to not let pain linger through resistance. Like someone trapped in quicksand, struggling only sinks you deeper. But when you pause, breathe, and slowly change your approach, you begin to find a way out. The mind works the same. The more you resist reality, the more lost you become. But when you say, "It happened and I can't change it," it's in that letting go that a door opens, the door to inner freedom. And from that place, you can finally live, not to satisfy the past, not to avoid the present, but to act, to choose, to build. Not the life you once imagined, but the life as it is, shaped each day by a better version of yourself. Acceptance is the end of resistance and the beginning of true strength. 6. Silence to hear yourself. We are living in an age where silence has become rare. From the moment we wake until we sleep, we are surrounded by noise. Phone alerts, news, conversations, work pressure, and endless inner dialogue. In such a world, people fear silence, fear the void, fear being alone with themselves. Because when there is nothing left to cling to outside, we are forced to confront the voice within, and not everyone is ready to hear it. But the Stoics understood. Clarity cannot exist without silence. You cannot know what you truly think, want, or where you're going if you keep running with the noise of the world. Marcus Aurelius, alone during nights amid war and the burden of ruling an empire, still made time to write in his journal, not to showcase philosophy, but to listen to himself, to reorganize his mind before making any decision. The silence he created wasn't isolation, but refuge, a place to see things more clearly before stepping forward to act. In silence, we discover what the noise had obscured, that some dreams were never ours, just ideas we were taught to chase, that some pain we carry doesn't linger because it still affects us, but because we've never sat still long enough to release it, that some life decisions weren't born of reason, but out of running from noise. And if we don't make space to listen to ourselves, we end up living by someone else's script, while our soul fades quietly. Silence is not emptiness, it is space, where your real voice has a chance to rise. Not the voice of self-doubt, nor the echoes of social expectations, but the voice of intuition, of personal values, of the inner compass you've long known, but haven't heard in a while. Silence is how you peel back the layers of noise wrapped around your identity to return to the core. No explanation needed, no justification, just presence and listening. I once knew a man who spent his youth caught in the chaos of work, meetings, and responsibilities. Every moment was packed with tasks, but one day, amid a panic attack without clear cause, he was forced to sit down. No music, no conversation, just breathing. And in 5 minutes of silence, he wept. Not from sorrow, but because it was the first time he truly heard himself. He realized he hadn't been running toward a goal, but away from feeling. From that day on, he began every morning in silence. a ritual to remind himself he still existed, not just as a working machine, but as a human with emotion, direction, and a need to live from the truth of who he was. The Stoics didn't seek silence to escape life. They chose silence to prepare for life. Like a warrior needing stillness before entering battle, you need inner quiet before making decisions, reacting, or speaking. Because if you act while the mind is messy, your words cut like knives and your actions carry regret. But if you allow yourself a pause, a moment without speaking or reacting, just to breathe and observe, you begin to see clearly. Silence is a form of discipline. Discipline to not react immediately. Discipline to not seek validation. Discipline to stand still even when your insides want to scream. But in that stillness, you'll feel a deeper strength. A strength that needs no defense, no approval, no victory. Just one thing, knowing who you are, what you're doing, and what matters most right now. And that's why the Stoics chose silence as a way of life. Not because they were weak or passive, but because they knew the world doesn't lack voices. What it lacks are people who listen, first to themselves, and from that listening, act with more clarity, compassion, and strength, not through volume, but through depth. 7. Discipline in speech. There is an interesting truth that few notice. Most problems in life don't come from what we don't say, but from the words we blurt out before we've had time to think. A thoughtless comment, an emotional reaction, an unnecessary remark. Any of these can cause wounds deeper than any action could, because once words have left your mouth, they cannot be taken back. They are arrows that cannot be recalled, and in the age of social media, where every word we write is recorded, discipline in speech has become more essential than ever. The Stoics understood this deeply. They saw mastery of speech as one of the highest forms of self-control, because holding your tongue when angry, staying silent when insulted, and resisting the urge to clarify yourself when misunderstood, that is not weakness, but inner strength. Epictetus once said, "Before you speak, let your mind consider whether it is necessary, whether it is the right time, and whether it reflects your values." Discipline in speech is not absolute silence. It is thoughtful choice before speaking. It demands the courage to not need a voice in every conversation. Think back to the last time you said something in anger. Maybe you were defending your point, or maybe it was just a reflex. But afterward, when the anger passed, did you feel relief? Or did you face regret, hurt you didn't mean to cause, or misunderstandings that could have been avoided? Discipline in speech begins in that moment, when you realize that timely silence does not make you lose, but helps you preserve peace and dignity. A person who is disciplined in speech is not someone who speaks little, but someone who speaks at the right time about the right things in the right way. They do not use words to manipulate, do not weaponize language to wound, and do not react just to assert their ego. They don't feel obligated to speak in every situation, nor do they feel insecure leaving silence in a conversation, because they understand that words only carry value when they're placed with care. And the respect they earn doesn't come from how much they say, but from the fact that when they speak, people listen. Discipline in speech also shows in the ability to pause before reacting. When someone criticizes you, when a situation provokes you, when you feel the urge to defend yourself, try to pause for a few seconds. Take a deep breath. Ask yourself, if I say this, What will change? Will it make me better? Or is it just a release of anger? That brief pause is the dividing line between a reactive life and a reasoned one. Today's world is full of arguments, instant rebuttals, and conversations where everyone is simply waiting to speak, not truly listening. In such an environment, those who practice discipline in speech command a rare kind of respect. They are not drawn into meaningless battles. They do not use speech to harm, and they don't need many words to show wisdom. Their presence, calm, deliberate, and discerning, is the mark of a well-trained inner life. I used to think that to be respected, I had to express more, speak more, prove myself faster, respond more sharply in every conversation. But then I realized, the more I spoke, the more I lost control. Not just of my words, but of my own mind. At first, staying silent was difficult, awkward even, but gradually I discovered that within that silence was a precious space, a place where I could truly hear myself. I learned to slow down a little before reacting, to observe my emotions before turning them into speech. I no longer got swept into unnecessary arguments, and I no longer felt the need to explain everything. Since I began speaking less and focusing on what I can control, I've found myself living with more direction, more lightness, and more peace. There's no need to prove anything, because true steadiness doesn't come from volume, but from the stillness within. If you found this content helpful, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Remember, sometimes what changes your life isn't what you say, but what you choose not to say. See you in the next video.